My name is Sylvia Carter. I am 72 years old, a widow, and for more than 4 decades I have been the keeper of the Carter Seaside Inn, a weathered oceanfront hotel that my late husband and I rebuilt brick by brick after the Great Storm of 1979. People think of me as a quiet woman, someone who lives among ledgers and linens, someone who polishes brass until it gleams. That is true. But what most do not know is that silence can carry more strength than shouting. I learned that truth the night of my daughter's wedding. The ballroom at Royal Oaks glowed gold with chandeliers. Roses lined the tables. A string quartet had just ended a piece when the microphone screeched softly. Clara, my only child, radiant in white lace, lifted her champagne glass. 150 guests turned their eyes toward her. For a moment, my heart swelled with foolish hope. Perhaps she would thank me. Perhaps she would honor the years I worked double shifts, the years I sewed hems at midnight so she could have ballet shoes, the years I slept in the manager's room while keeping the inn alive. Instead, her words cut the air sharper than glass. "Mother," she said, her voice carrying across crystal and candlelight, "give us the deed. The Carter Seaside Inn belongs to the next generation. $6 million of legacy should pass to me and Evan now." The sound dropped from the room. Forks froze above plates. A woman in lavender gasped into her hand. Somewhere, a champagne flute cracked against marble. My pulse beat in my ears, but my body stayed still. Clara's groom, Evan, shifted uneasily, adjusting his cufflink, but he did not speak, and all those witnesses waited for me to yield. I shook my head once. "No," I said softly, but firmly. Clara's eyes flashed. Her face, framed by a veil I had once ironed with trembling hands, hardened into something unrecognizable. She stepped toward me, her gown whispering across the marble, and before I could brace myself, her hand struck my chest. Not a hug, not a caress, but a tearing motion. The clasp of my necklace snapped. Pearls struck the marble floor one by one, clattering louder than the quartet had played all evening. They scattered under tables, rolled between shoes. One pearl, the one Harold had chosen for me on our wedding day, spun across the floor and stopped at the base of the stage. 150 people inhaled as a single body, but no one moved. The sting at my neck was nothing compared to the hollow pain in my chest. Yet I would not give Clara the victory of tears. I bent slowly, knees stiff, gathering the beads into my palm. My fingers shook, but steadied. I straightened, holding the broken chain like evidence, and met her eyes. "You will sign it," Clara hissed, close enough that I smelled the sharp wine on her breath. "You owe us." "Stop pretending you are still the landlady. You are old." The silence after her words was heavier than any shout. Evan looked at the floor. Guests whispered behind their hands. My cheeks burned, not from shame, but from clarity. I turned. I walked. Each heel strike on marble sounded like a gavel. The crowd parted in uneasy silence as if I carried fire in my hands. Clara's triumphant smile faltered for just a moment. Then she called after me, but I did not answer. I reached the foyer doors. Behind me, the music faltered, then resumed as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Outside, the night air stung my face with salt. The ocean wind whipped against the columns. I slipped my hand into my small black clutch. My fingers knew the number by heart. The line clicked, and I whispered, steady as stone, "Thomas, it's Sylvia. Bring the papers. Tonight." He paused only a beat before answering. "Mrs. Carter, once we do this, there is no turning back." "There is nothing left to turn back to," I replied. I ended the call. The broken chain rattled in my purse like a warning bell. I looked once more at the glowing ballroom doors. Soon, when they opened again, Clara would no longer be the radiant bride basking in adoration. She would be the daughter who underestimated her mother. She would learn that real money is quiet and that silence can change everything. And so I waited, calm, composed, with salt wind on my face. The tide had turned. When I stepped out of the ballroom that night, clutching the broken chain in my purse, The salt air pulled me backward in time. That hotel my daughter demanded like a prize had never been just numbers on a page. It was history, carved into my hands and Harold's hands. It was nights of exhaustion and mornings of stubborn hope. And to understand why I refused her, you must understand how that building became our life. I was 29 when Harold and I first laid eyes on the property. It stood along the coast like a forgotten skeleton, windows shattered by the hurricane of 1979, paint stripped away by salt and wind. Locals called it a ruin. Some wanted it torn down. But Harold saw a shell waiting to be filled, and I saw the possibility of shelter, of stability, of a place where laughter could return. We were young, newly married and broke. Harold was a mechanic, a man with broad shoulders and grease under his nails. I was a bookkeeper, the one who knew how to stretch dollars until they squealed. Together, we bargained for the deed when no one else wanted it. We offered a fraction of the value, a sum that emptied our savings, and the bank, relieved to be rid of the wreck, handed us the keys. The day we first walked inside, the floor sagged beneath our feet. Rain had soaked the beams. The wallpaper peeled like old scabs. I remember the smell, mildew and seaweed, sharp and unwelcoming. But Harold touched the banister with reverence. He said, "Wood can be sanded, rot can be replaced. This place has bones." And so we began. Every day after his shift at the garage, Harold came with his toolbox. I brought ledgers, scrub brushes, and a thermos of soup. We worked until the moon rose. He patched pipes with patience, learning boilers as if they were living creatures. I scrubbed linens until my knuckles cracked, painted walls with borrowed brushes, balanced receipts on the back of envelopes. Our friends thought we were foolish. "That inn is a grave," one said. But Harold and I believed in quiet resurrection. On reopening day, there was no grand ribbon, no orchestra, no glitter. Just a dull pair of scissors borrowed from the town hall and a strip of red fabric Harold's sister cut from her old dress. The handful of guests who came were fishermen with salt still clinging to their sleeves. They shook Harold's hand, nodded at me, and booked rooms for the season. That was enough. That evening, as we stood at the top of the steps, tired but upright, Harold leaned close to my ear. His words etched themselves deeper than any sermon. Real money is quiet. Noise only invites trouble. I did not know then how many times I would replay that sentence. At the time, it sounded like a proverb. Later, it became a shield. Harold believed wealth was not measured by the shouts of success, but by the quiet ability to keep the lights on, to pay wages on time, to make sure soup was hot and sheets were clean. I carried those words in my bones. The necklace, Clara, tore from my neck years later, had come from that first season. We could not afford anything flashy. One night, Harold walked in with a small box, his fingers rough from wrenches. Inside was a single pearl on a silver chain. He said, "It is not grand, Sylvia, but it is honest. Keep it through every storm." The pearl lay cool against my throat that night. I promised him I would wear it always, through births and funerals, through shortages and small miracles. When the bills pressed hard, I touched it. When the lobby glowed with the laughter of guests, I touched it. That necklace was not luxury. It was a memory fastened in silver. Over the years, the inn grew. We never made millions in cash. Instead, we measured profit in returning families, in summer children who grew up calling the place their second home, in Christmases where guests gathered around a mismatched tree and sang carols off-key. Every squeak of the floorboards, every rattle of the service elevator, every thud of luggage on carpet became part of our rhythm, and Clara, our little girl, was raised inside those rhythms. As a toddler, she napped in the linen room while I folded sheets. She toddled through hallways smelling of lemon polish, learned to walk between carts of laundry. The staff slipped her muffins, called her our mascot. Harold carried her on his shoulders down the boardwalk after 12-hour days. He wanted her to know the weight of honest work, not just the shine of results. But that was years before the wedding night, before ambition hardened her gaze. I think of that often. how a place can hold such contradictions, laughter and loss, devotion and betrayal, how a necklace given in quiet love could later be torn away in public humiliation. Yet still, the meaning of that pearl remained mine. Harold's words echoed in me as I held the broken chain after Clara's demand. Real money is quiet. He had been right. Because in silence, you can gather strength. In silence, you can prepare documents, build defenses, draw boundaries. In silence, you can watch others underestimate you until the moment you decide to act. That is why I called Thomas with such certainty. Because the inn was not just a $6 million property, it was the ledger of my life, filled with sacrifices written in invisible ink. It was my marriage. It was my motherhood. It was proof that dignity can live in cracked walls and scarred beams. And though Clara had forgotten those roots, I had not. When I close my eyes even now, I see the younger version of Harold in me, standing on those weathered steps with dull scissors, believing that something broken could be restored. That belief had carried me this far, and it would carry me further still, beyond the betrayal in the ballroom, into the battle that was yet to come. The Carter Seaside Inn was not only where I worked, it was where Clara grew up. Her crib stood in the linen room during her earliest years. While I folded sheets, I would peek over and see her tiny fists curling and uncurling, her chest rising and falling to the steady hum of the laundry machines. She never cried much. The staff adored her, slipping her muffins or letting her toddle through the lobby while I checked in guests. To them, she was the inn's little mascot. To me, she was proof that all the sacrifices Harold and I had made were worth something. Harold often carried her down the boardwalk after long days. I would watch from the lobby doorway as he hoisted her onto his shoulders, pointing out the lobster boats bobbing against the horizon. His voice was gravelly from years of work, but tender when he spoke to her. He wanted Clara to see that even the hardest labor could lead to beauty if you looked in the right direction. When Clara was 6, she learned to ring the brass bell at the front desk. The first time she managed it, the sound startled her. She burst into laughter, so contagious that even the tired fishermen checking in laughed along. I remember Harold leaning against the counter, his eyes proud. "She has a sparkle," he whispered. I nodded, believing that sparkle would guide her into a life of kindness. We spoiled her, though we never admitted it aloud. After 12-hour shifts, Harold still found the strength to carry her piggyback to bed. I slipped chocolate kisses under her pillow when I balanced the books at midnight. When she wanted ballet lessons, I squeezed the budget to make room for shoes and tuition. We did without new clothes, without vacations so she could have the extras. It felt right at the time. Children, after all, were meant to be given more than we had. The inn became Clara's playground. She built castles out of luggage carts, hid inside the mail slot, and treated the long hallways as her private stage. Guests adored her charm. She learned early that a tilt of her head or a smile could earn her attention. Even tips slipped into her hand like she was already grown. Harold called it the Carter Sparkle. He meant it as praise, but I sometimes wondered if sparkle could blind as much as it dazzled. By her teenage years, the sparkle had sharpened. She no longer saw the inn as a maze to explore, but as a stage to perform upon. When guests complimented her, she drank in their words like nectar. I watched as she began to measure her worth not by hard work, but by how others looked at her. I kept telling myself she understood what lay beneath the shine. She had seen Harold repair boilers in the freezing cold. She had seen me scrub stains out of carpets at midnight. Surely she remembered the rhythm of honest labor, but slowly, quietly, she drifted from that truth. One evening, when she was 16, I found her standing in the lobby, gazing at her reflection in the glass doors. She turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wish this place was grander? Something people would talk about in magazines?" I smiled, tired but gentle. "Grand is not what keeps the lights on. Quiet work does." She frowned, not satisfied with my answer. That was the first time I felt the distance open between us. As she grew older, she spoke less of school and more of futures beyond the inn. She liked to imagine expansions, rebrandings, possibilities that sounded more like glossy advertisements than sustainable choices. I listened, nodding, but my heart grew heavy. She wanted shine. I wanted stability. Still, I kept hoping. Hope is a mother's most dangerous habit. I thought if I kept the necklace Harold had given me close, if I touched the pearl at my throat during difficult moments, Clara would somehow absorb its meaning. That true love, true work, true wealth were quiet and enduring. But Clara began to see the inn not as a home, not even as a steady livelihood, but as a vault waiting to be opened. When she looked at the staircase, she did not see Harold's hands sanding the banister smooth. She saw potential buyers impressed with charm. When she looked at the chandeliers, she did not remember the night we bartered for them secondhand from a closing theater. She saw glitter fit for investors. I told myself it was just youthful ambition. I told myself she would grow out of it. She had been raised among ledgers and linens, after all. Surely the muscle memory of sweeping floors and setting tables would return to her. But each year, the distance widened. By the time Harold passed away, Clara no longer touched the walls with familiarity. She glided through the lobby as if it were a backdrop. She posed on the staircase as if it were a photo set. She smiled at guests, but not with the warmth of someone rooted in the place, rather with the calculation of someone rehearsing a performance. And I, blinded by love, still believed she would remember. That is why the shock of her demand on her wedding night cut so deep. It was not born in a single moment. It was the harvest of years, years in which we had mistaken sparkle for strength, years in which we had indulged her, believing kindness meant giving without boundary, years in which I had confused rescuing with loving. As I look back now, I see the pattern clearly. A daughter who grew up in a hotel, treated like its princess, would naturally see it not as a roof, but as a crown. But I did not see it then. I only saw the child Harold carried on his shoulders, the girl who once rang the brass bell with a laugh that filled the lobby. And so I forgave too quickly. I gave too much. I looked away when she treated the inn as her stage. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself sparkle was harmless. I was wrong. The winter Harold died, the ocean seemed to howl louder than usual. It was January, the kind of cold that stiffens the boards of the boardwalk and makes the brass handles of the hotel doors bite at your palms. He had complained of chest pain for weeks, but Harold was the sort of man who worked through pain, who believed sweat could cure almost anything. Until the morning, he collapsed beside the boilers, the steam rising around him like smoke from a battlefield. The ambulance arrived quickly, but not quickly enough. A coronary, they said, a word that sounded clinical, as if it could summarize the collapse of my world in a single syllable. I rode with him to the hospital, clutching the pearl at my throat so hard it left a dent in my skin. His hand was still warm when I kissed it, but by the time we reached the emergency doors, the warmth was gone. I signed forms I could not see through my tears. The nurse spoke softly, explaining next steps, but all I heard was silence, the kind that falls when the foundation of your life has been pulled away. I slipped Harold's wedding band into my pocket that night. I have kept it there ever since, a circle of gold worn thin from decades of work. The next morning, I unlocked the front doors of the Carter Seaside Inn. My hands trembled on the brass handles, but guests were waiting, and someone had to keep the lights on. Harold had always said the work was bigger than us. I understood it fully that morning. Clara was in college by then. She came home for the funeral, her eyes red, but her posture careful, as if grief was a costume she wasn't sure how to wear. She kissed my cheek, held me for a moment, then spent most of the service scrolling through her phone under the pew. Later that night, she whispered, "Mom, you should sell. You can't manage this alone." I shook my head. "This hotel is my life's work. Your father's, too. I'll keep it." She sighed, almost impatient. "You could live comfortably. Travel. Move into a modern place with an elevator. Don't you want that?" I looked at her, remembering how she once built castles out of luggage carts. "Comfort," I said, "isn't always the same as peace." From that moment, I knew she would drift farther. Managing the inn without Harold was like rowing a boat alone through heavy tide. I learned to haggle with oil suppliers, to calm guests when the heating pipes groaned in the night, to balance accounts that seemed determined to break. I lived simply on purpose. Old shoes that could handle wet floors, soup made from whatever the fishermen had left at the pier, no loans we could not repay. The necklace stayed around my neck, cool against my skin, a lighthouse in every storm. Each time I touched it, I remembered Harold's words, "Real money is quiet." That mantra steadied me when exhaustion threatened to drown me. Meanwhile, Clara's visits grew infrequent. When she did appear, she arrived in expensive coats, her nails polished in colors that looked foreign against the chipped paint of the lobby. She complained about the peeling wallpaper, the old rugs, and the smell of lemon oil. She wanted glamour. I offered grit. One evening she said, "Mom, you can't live like this forever. This hotel is a burden. You should sell it while it's still worth something. With $6 million, you could live like royalty." I smiled faintly. "Royalty doesn't scrub its own floors, but I do, and that is enough." She rolled her eyes, already half turned toward her car waiting outside. There were nights when loneliness pressed hard against me. After long shifts, I would sit at Harold's old desk, his photo propped beside the ledgers, and whisper aloud as if he could still hear me. "I'm holding on," I'd say. "The boilers still run. The lights are still warm. The guests are safe." And somehow, saying it gave me strength. I also began to notice things about Clara I had ignored before. The way she flinched when I mentioned hard work. The way her words leaned always toward image, status, and expansion, never toward care or community. She had drifted so far from the rhythms that raised her, and I did not know how to pull her back. But still, I indulged. When she needed money for courses she never finished, I sent it. When she asked for help with rent in the city, I paid it. I told myself it was temporary, that she would steady herself eventually. Each transfer, each check, I justified with Harold's old principle. Caring is measured in what you quietly shoulder. Only later would I realize how badly I had misunderstood him. Keeping the hotel alive through those years became both my punishment and my salvation. Every morning, I lit the lamps in the lobby, arranged flowers, and wiped down the brass bell. Every night, I balanced receipts by hand, noting each dollar with the precision of someone guarding more than money. I was guarding dignity, Harold's memory, and the roof that had sheltered so many souls. Guests often told me, "Mrs. Carter, this inn feels alive." I would smile, but inside I knew it was alive because it was fed with my very breath. Each day I poured into it was a day stolen from my body, yet it gave back meaning, a rhythm that kept grief from swallowing me whole. Clara could not see that. She saw only potential profits, market value, glossy advertisements in her imagination. To her, the inn was a vault locked by my stubborn hands. To me, it was the last piece of Harold, the last place his laughter still echoed in the pipes, his touch still marked on the sanded wood. And so, I worked. Alone, but not broken. Quiet, but not weak. What Clara never understood was this. The inn was never just about money. It was a testament to endurance. And even in Harold's absence, I was determined to endure. It was a windy Saturday when Clara first brought Evan to the inn. The sea hurled whitecaps against the seawall, and the lobby carried that familiar blend of lemon polish and faint coffee. I had polished the brass bell that morning until it gleamed and set out a plate of oatmeal cookies, the same small ritual I performed whenever I needed to remind myself that the hotel was still a place of welcome, no matter how frayed my heart felt. Clara swept in wearing a crisp white coat, her hair perfectly styled, her eyes bright with the sort of hunger I had come to recognize. Behind her, Evan followed, his hand light on her back as if guiding her into a showroom. He paused just inside the doors, letting his gaze travel across every detail. The oak desk scuffed by decades of guests, the Persian rug faded in spots, the chandelier that hummed softly when the heat kicked on. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the sort of smile a man gives when he has already decided what something is worth. "Charming," he said at last, the word clipped and polished like an appraisal. I watched Clara beam at him, then turn toward me as though she had just revealed a prize. "Mom, isn't it beautiful when someone new notices the character of this place?" Evan walked further into the lobby, running his finger along the banister, pressing down on the cushion of an armchair as though testing it for weakness. When his eyes fell on the chandelier, he tilted his head. "It's quaint. With the right renovations, you could triple the bookings. People love nostalgia, but they also love luxury." I forced a polite smile, though inside my chest ached. The words quaint and renovations had followed me like shadows ever since Harold's passing. "We keep it simple here," I said. "Comfort and honesty are our best marketing tools." Clara laughed lightly, slipping her arm through Evan's. "Mom loves her paper ledgers, too. But don't worry, Evan, one day I'll modernize her." She glanced at me with a teasing smile that was just sharp enough to sting. The rest of the tour was no different. Evan lingered in doorways, pointing out details that needed updating. He asked about occupancy rates and seasonal variants, his tone detached, efficient. Clara chimed in with soft promises. "We could rebrand. Imagine Carter Coastal as a boutique destination. The name alone has potential. That word left a bitter taste in my mouth. Harold and I had never spoken of potential. We had spoken of survival. We had measured our success not in glossy brochures, but in families who returned year after year, in children who grew up chasing seagulls along our shore. On the third floor, Evan paused near the fire stairs. "It must be hard for you to climb these every day, Sylvia," he said, his voice soft with feigned concern. Clara touched my sleeve gently, rehearsed compassion in her eyes. "Mom, you should think about moving into something. Smaller, safer. A ground-floor apartment near a clinic. No more late nights at the desk." Her words landed like dust, light but suffocating. I steadied myself, touching the pearl at my throat out of habit. "I'm not alone," I said. "I live among my work and my people." Still, Clara pressed. She left brochures on my pillow, glossy pictures of senior living communities, smiling faces gathered around heated pools. Evan asked for access to my accounting to help with forecasting. Clara requested a spare set of keys just in case. One afternoon, I found Evan standing in the office doorway, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low tone he must have assumed I wouldn't hear. He was asking a lender about collateral options, about repositioning, about upside. When he noticed me, he ended the call quickly and praised the view from the office window, pretending nothing had happened. The more time Evan spent at the inn, the more I recognized the growing gulf between Clara and me. She no longer saw the hotel as a roof that sheltered her childhood or as the heartbeat of a family. She saw only equity, numbers that glittered in her imagination. And she wanted Evan to see it too, to confirm that her inheritance was not sentimental, but financial, a vault waiting for her hands. That evening, when Clara and Evan finally left, I sat alone in the lobby. The lamplight glowed across the familiar rug, and the air smelled faintly of polish and sea salt. I ran my fingers along the edge of the oak desk, the same desk where Harold and I once balanced books late into the night. I thought of the years spent patching leaks, sanding wood, cooking meals, and greeting weary travelers with smiles. To Clara, these walls had become a stage. To Evan, they were a ledger. To me, they were my life. The gap between us had never felt wider. It began with gentle suggestions, the kind wrapped in sweetness but hiding sharp edges. Clara started leaving articles on my nightstand about elder safety. "Mom, just something to think about," she would say, her tone dipped in concern. Evan followed with statistics, numbers about accidents on stairs, about the risks of running a business at my age. Together, they formed a chorus that insisted I was fragile, though I had never felt more certain of my strength. One Sunday afternoon, they arrived together holding takeout cartons that smelled faintly of sesame oil. We ate at the small table in the lounge. Between bites, Clara slid a glossy pamphlet toward me. The cover showed silver-haired couples lounging by a pool, cocktails in hand. The words "Independent Senior Living" glimmered in embossed letters. "Look how lovely it is," Clara said, her voice warm, rehearsed. No more boilers to worry about. No late nights at the desk. You'd have community, safety, everything you need. Evan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as if he were presenting a pitch. And the hotel, Sylvia, it's prime real estate. If you sold, you could move into a place like this and still have millions left. That's security. I looked down at the pamphlet, at the strangers smiling in stage perfection. My hand rose instinctively to the pearl necklace at my throat, the chain cool against my skin. I didn't speak. Silence has a weight heavier than any argument. Clara mistook my quiet as hesitation. We just want what's best for you, Mom. We worry. What if you fall? What if no one's around to help? I finally raised my eyes to hers. I am not alone. I live among my work, among people who care for this place as much as I do, but Clara shook her head gently, as if I were the child and she the parent. You deserve rest. You've carried this burden long enough. Let us take it from here. Her words were meant to soothe, but they pressed against my chest like a hand trying to push me out of my own life. That evening, after they left, I sat in the office with the pamphlet still in my hand. The smiling faces on the cover stared back at me, hollow. I set it down beside Harold's old photograph, the contrast painful. Harold's smile had been worn, lined with labor and love. The people in the pamphlet smiled like mannequins. I touched the necklace again. The pearl seemed to pulse with memory. Harold's voice echoed, "Real money is quiet." Noise only invites trouble. I thought of how much noise Clara and Evan brought into the inn, their words, their plans, their future that left no room for me. Later that week, my sister Marjorie stopped by. She was carrying a jar of chowder, the way she always did when she sensed I was low. She had been a nurse her whole life, her hands strong and gentle at once. She listened as I recounted Clara's suggestions, Evan's numbers, the pamphlets piling on my desk. Marjorie put her spoon down, her eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who had watched too many families fall apart in hospital waiting rooms. "Sylvia, listen to me. They're softening you up. First, it's safe. Then it's my responsibility. Next thing, they'll want signatures. Don't rely on memory alone. Write things down. Dates, remarks, visitors. Paper doesn't forget the way people do." Her words sank deep. She was right. My love for Clara made me vulnerable to forgetting, to excusing. But paper carried truth beyond sentiment. That night, I found an unused blue notebook and slid it under the main ledger in the desk. I wrote my first entry with a shaky hand. Clara and Evan, Sunday. Pamphlet for senior living. Phrases used, burden, rest, safety. It felt strange, like testifying against my own daughter, but also necessary. Each day afterward, I added more. Notes about Evan measuring the lobby when he thought I was asleep, dates when Clara asked for keys, or left another brochure on my pillow. Even small details. Evan's tone on the phone, Clara's look when she mentioned modernization. The act of writing steadied me, as though each word laid a brick in a wall I could lean against when their persuasion grew heavy. And it did grow heavy. Each visit carried another layer. Evan spoke of investors, of dashboards and forecasts. Clara teased me about my paper ledgers, calling them quaint, then smiling at Evan as if to say, "One day this will all be ours." But I did not argue. I did not shout. I touched the necklace, I wrote in the notebook, and I stayed silent. Silence unsettles people. They expect defense, protest, something they can push against. When they receive only calm quiet, they begin to doubt themselves. I learned that each time Clara's eyes flickered in uncertainty when I refused to engage. Marjorie's words repeated in my mind, "Paper remembers longer than people." I understood then that the necklace was not my only anchor. The notebook would become one too, a quiet record of truth, waiting for the day when silence alone would not be enough. It was the little things that revealed more than words. Evan thought he was discreet, but the walls of the Carter Seaside Inn have a way of carrying sound. One afternoon, I heard the soft click of a measuring tape echoing through the lobby. I stepped quietly from the back office and saw him near the staircase, stretching the tape along the banister, jotting notes on his phone. He froze when he realized I was watching. "Just admiring the architecture," he said with a grin that never reached his eyes. I nodded slowly, but inside my heart sank. Men do not measure banisters when they are simply admiring. They measure when they are planning to change what already exists. Later that week, after another Sunday dinner, I went upstairs to find a glossy brochure lying neatly on my pillow. It showed sunlit rooms, fitness centers, and a headline promising peace of mind for your golden years. Clara's handwriting curled across the corner. "Think about it, Mom. Love, C." I sat on the edge of the bed, the brochure trembling in my hands. Love. That word used to warm me when it came from her lips. Now it felt like leverage, as if affection had been weaponized. I folded the brochure, placed it in my drawer, and touched the pearl necklace around my neck. The cool bead reminded me of Harold's words, "Real money is quiet. Quiet like the decision I made that night." I pulled out the blue notebook Marjorie had told me to keep. My pen hovered for a moment before I wrote, "Evan measured the lobby staircase. Clara brochure on pillow. Phrases, peace of mind, golden years." From then on, the notebook became my second heartbeat. I recorded every detail, no matter how small. If Evan asked about the occupancy rate in January, I wrote it down. If Clara sighed when I carried a heavy box, I wrote it down. If Evan's smile tightened when he thought I wasn't looking, it went into the notebook. The act of writing steadied me. It turned helplessness into clarity. With every line, I felt less like prey and more like a witness. Evan and Clara continued their rhythm. They brought dinner on Sundays, as if generosity could cover the scent of strategy. Evan asked if I had thought more about transition plans. Clara kissed my cheek and said, "One day, this place will be even better." I nodded politely, never raising my voice, never arguing. I touched my necklace and let silence answer for me. Silence unsettled them. Evan would fidget with his watch when I said nothing. Clara's smile would falter when her sweet, rehearsed lines met no resistance. They expected protest, perhaps even tears. What they received was calm. I began to understand that silence was not weakness, it was armor. At night, when the inn had quieted, I would sit by Harold's old desk, the notebook open before me, and review my entries. Each page reminded me of what was real. I was not imagining their tactics. I was not inventing the tightening in my chest when Clara spoke of selling. Paper made it undeniable. Sometimes Marjorie joined me. She would sip tea and read over my shoulder. "Good," she would say, tapping the page. Dates, words, gestures. This is how you protect yourself. I felt both ashamed and relieved. Ashamed that I needed protection from my own daughter, relieved that I had the foresight to prepare. One night I overheard Evan again. His voice carried down the hallway from the office, low but distinct. "Yes, collateral. Coastal property with upside. Boutique reposition," he said into his phone. My stomach tightened. Those were not the words of a concerned son-in-law. Those were the words of an investor circling prey. He ended the call when he saw me, plastering on a smile. "The view from this office is incredible, Sylvia." Have you ever thought about a brand partnership? National reach? I simply answered, "We partner with the weather and the repetition of good service. That's what keeps us full enough." His smile twitched, like a clock forced to tick off beat. That night, my notebook entry was longer than usual. Evan phone call, words used, collateral, reposition, upside. Watch me carefully afterward, suggested brand partnership. I replied with weather and service. His smile faltered. Each time I wrote, I felt less afraid. Clara continued her soft campaign. She sent me texts with links to lifestyle articles. 10 signs it's time to downsize, or why senior living communities boost longevity. She added heart emojis, as though love could soften the implication that I was failing. I copied those texts into my notebook, word for word, date and time included. What they never realized was that every gesture, every word, every attempt to move me like a pawn was being preserved. Paper remembers longer than charm. My silence became my sharpest weapon. They thought I was yielding, when in truth I was collecting. They thought they were drawing closer to their prize, when in truth they were stepping deeper into a record they could not erase. At times, I wanted to scream, to shake Clara and remind her of who she once was, the little girl who colored behind the front desk, who asked me if seagulls got weekends off. But instead, I touched the pearl necklace and stayed still. Love had once built this place. Greed would not be allowed to take it. I did not need to fight loudly. I only needed to endure, to watch, to write. And in that silence, I felt Harold beside me, steady as ever. The Saturday they came, the sky was brittle with winter light. I had polished the lobby until it smelled of lemon oil and sea air. Fresh hydrangeas sat in a vase on the counter. I wanted the inn to look like itself, not like a property on the market. But when the headlights swept across the windows and 4 figures climbed the steps, I knew they were not coming as guests. They were coming as appraisers. Clara led the way, radiant in her white coat. Evan was at her side, carrying his clipboard like a badge. Behind them, his parents, Raymond and Judith, followed with the air of people already calculating value. Raymond's stride was measured, deliberate. Judith's eyes swept the facade, pitying and appraising in the same glance. "Mom," Clara said sweetly as she opened the door, "we've been thinking a lot about your future." They arranged themselves in the lounge as though convening a board meeting. Raymond adjusted his tie. Judith crossed her legs. Evan cleared his throat. Clara sat nearest to me, her voice dipped in sugar. "This hotel has been good to you, Mom, but it's a lot for one woman to manage at your age. We worry. Boilers, stairs, late-night guests. It isn't safe," Judith chimed in, her tone polished. "Exactly. We've researched a beautiful senior residence nearby. 24-hour care, social activities, and prepared meals. You'd be surrounded by friends your age. No more burdens." I stood by the doorframe, my fingers grazing the wood as though it could anchor me. Their words swirled like a rehearsed script, each line building upon the last. Concern wrapped around ambition like ribbon around a knife. Clara leaned forward, her eyes bright with practiced sympathy. "Mom, it's not just about safety. Evan and I have been struggling to find the right home to begin our marriage. This hotel is so big, and it's worth so much. It would make sense if we transitioned you somewhere more comfortable. The deed could go to us, and you'd never have to worry again." Her hand reached for mine. It felt foreign, like a customer pressing for a refund. Raymond unfolded a folder from his briefcase and slid papers across the coffee table. "We've run the numbers," he said. "With the sale, you'd have more than enough to cover the residence for decades. There'd be surplus for Clara and Evan to start fresh. Everyone wins, everyone except me," I thought. Judith leaned back, her eyes narrowing with pity disguised as reason. "You've done your part, Sylvia. It's time to let the younger generation take over. You'll thank us when you're safe and cared for." For a long moment, I let the silence breathe. The chandelier hummed softly above, the sound louder than their rehearsed arguments. My heart ached, but clarity spread like a tide. This was no spontaneous concern. This was a coordinated ambush. They thought I was frail. They thought silence meant surrender. They mistook kindness for weakness. "Clara's?" Hand lingered, waiting for mine to close around it. "Please, Mom. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Think of what's best for all of us." I withdrew gently, lifting my chin. My voice was calm, steady, the way you speak to guests you plan never to invite back. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I'll think about what you've said." Evan shifted, unsatisfied. Raymond snapped the folder shut. Judith exhaled with a smile too tight. Clara's eyes flickered, frustration beneath her polished exterior. They left with polite farewells, descending the steps like officials leaving an inspection. I stood at the threshold, watching their backs recede into the winter dusk. For a moment, I felt the old ache of motherhood, the temptation to give in, to make things easier for Clara. But then my hand rose to the necklace at my throat. The pearl was cool, solid, a reminder that memory does not bend to performance. When I closed the door and slid the bolt, my chest burned, not with fear, but with resolve. Later that night, I opened my blue notebook and wrote, "Meeting with Clara, Evan, Raymond, Judith. Proposals, senior residence, deed transfer. Words, burden, safety, comfort, younger generation. My response, I will think about it." As my pen scratched the page, I thought about the question I knew every viewer would ask if they heard this story. Would I have given in for the sake of family? Should I have said yes because love requires sacrifice? But love without respect is not love. It is hunger, and I would not feed it. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves had listened in on the meeting and carried the weight of every false smile. I sat alone at Harold's old desk, the glow of the lamp spreading across worn wood rings where coffee cups had rested years before. The air smelled faintly of polish and salt drifting in from the ocean. I reached for the necklace at my throat, unclasped it slowly, and laid it beside Harold's photograph. His face in that picture was steady, eyes bright beneath the brim of his fisherman's cap. He had been gone for more than a decade, but when I looked at him in that frame, I could still hear his voice. Low, calm, never hurried. Real money is quiet, Sylvia. Noise only invites trouble. The pearl gleamed faintly under the lamplight, a lighthouse in miniature. My hand trembled as I touched it. Clara had once traced that same pearl when she was a child, asking if it was magic. I had told her yes, because in a way it was. It was Harold's promise that storms could be survived. Tonight it was something else. A reminder that promises could be broken too. I whispered into the quiet room, words I had never said aloud before. I don't need to prove love with property anymore. Not with deeds, not with transfers, not with silent rescues. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. The truth had lived inside me for years, but speaking it felt like lifting a stone off my chest. The phone sat on the desk, its plastic casing scratched from decades of use. My fingers hovered, then dialed the number I knew by heart. 2 rings, then Thomas's voice, steady, practical, always carrying the scent of law and order even through a wire. "It's me," I said softly. "Sylvia." He paused for only a second. "Are you ready?" I glanced again at Harold's picture, the necklace glinting beside it. "Yes, prepare everything we discussed. Cancel the guarantees, end the transfers. If there are papers to file, have them ready." Thomas's tone sharpened, not with judgment, but with gravity. "Once we take this step, there is no turning back. You understand that?" I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. There is nothing left to turn back to. "Do it, Thomas." When the call ended, the room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I wrote in my blue notebook, "Called Thomas," instructed him to prepare cancellations, transfers, protections. My decision. No more proving love with property. As the ink dried, my shoulders eased for the first time in months. It wasn't a triumph I felt, but a release. I thought of every quiet bailout, every time I had covered a debt, every night I had told myself I was saving Clara by writing another check. The truth was harder. I had been shielding her from consequences, and in doing so, I had built the very entitlement that now threatened to devour the inn. Marjorie's voice echoed in my mind. "You do not owe your child a deed as proof of love. You owe yourself breath." I leaned back, my eyes closing against the soft hum of the lamp. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love. Tonight, I understood the difference. I rose slowly, carrying the necklace in my hand. At Harold's photo, I paused, placing it gently beside him. "Keep this for me," I whispered, "until I am strong enough to wear it again." The pearl caught the light, scarred but still whole, just like me. In the stillness of that room, I realized silence could be louder than any speech. Silence could be the line that no one dared to cross. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle. For the first time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a boundary. The ballroom shimmered that evening, golden light spilling from chandeliers onto tables draped in white linen. Guests clinked glasses, laughter rang above the hum of the string quartet, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe this would be a normal wedding, my only daughter in lace, her eyes bright, her future just beginning. Then Clara stepped forward with a microphone, her gown glittering like frost under the lights. She raised her glass. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate not just love, but legacy." Her eyes swept across the room until they found me. "And that legacy is the Carter Seaside Inn. Without my mother, it would not exist. But now, it belongs to us. The next generation." The words crashed through the room. Forks froze midair. The violinist lowered his bow. Guests turned, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. I felt my pulse throb, but I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Clara's voice sharpened, carrying across the crowd. "Mother, give us the deed tonight. $6 million of history, ready to grow into something greater. Sign it over, here, before all who witness this day." Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests leaned forward, eager for spectacle. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. I touched the pearl at my throat, feeling its cool weight. I whispered softly, more to myself than to anyone else, "No." Clara descended the steps, eyes blazing. She reached me, close enough that I could smell the wine on her breath. "You will," she hissed. "You owe it to us." "You're too old to keep playing innkeeper." I shook my head once, slow, deliberate. Her hand shot out, ripping the necklace from my neck. The clasp snapped. Pearls scattered across the marble like rain on stone. The sound was louder than the quartet had been moments before. Guests gasped, covering their mouths, their phones rising instinctively. My chest stung from the sudden tug, but I did not cry. I did not plead. I bent down slowly, gathered the broken chain in my palm, and slipped it into my purse. Then I stood, silent, and walked toward the doors. The crowd parted as if a tide moved through them. I heard whispers. "$6 million. Did you see?" Her own mother? But I did not look back. Each step of my heels against the marble was measured, steady, like a gavel striking truth. The night air hit me with salt and cold. I walked across the parking lot, the ballroom glowing behind me like a lantern filled with false warmth. My Buick waited at the far edge. Inside, I laid the broken necklace on my lap. Under the dome light, one pearl gleamed, scratched from its fall, but still whole. I took out my phone, dialed the number I knew by heart. "Thomas," I said when he answered, "it's time. Bring everything. Bring the papers tonight." His voice was steady, though I could hear the gravity beneath it. "Are you certain, Sylvia? Once we begin, there is no undoing." I closed my fist around the necklace. The pearl pressed into my skin. I've never been more certain. Minutes later, headlights swung across the lot. A smaller car pulled up beside mine. Thomas stepped out, his leather briefcase in hand. The familiar squeak of his door, the neat click of his shoes on asphalt, carried more comfort than any embrace could. He opened the briefcase on the hood of my Buick. Inside, folders lay stacked, each a boundary I had long delayed drawing. "First," he said, his voice calm, "we cancel the lease guarantee. The apartment Clara and Evan occupy under your credit will be theirs to secure or lose." He slid the document toward me, pen ready. My hand trembled, but I signed. "Second, the automatic transfers. The monthly deposits into their accounts end tonight again." I signed. Each stroke felt like stitching a seam closed. "Third," Thomas continued, his eyes lifting toward the glowing ballroom, "the guarantee for this very event. Without your backing, the bill becomes theirs." I hesitated, picturing the guests inside, the music forced back into motion, the cake waiting to be cut. But then I saw Clara's hand tearing the necklace from my neck. I lowered the pen and signed. Thomas gathered the documents, his motions precise. "By morning, Sylvia, their world will look different." I breathed deeply, my eyes on the broken necklace. "Good. It's time they learned silence doesn't mean surrender." The ballroom doors opened in the distance, muffled music spilling out. I knew that soon the tide of whispers would turn. Tonight was not their inheritance. Tonight was my boundary. The night was cold, the asphalt damp with a thin sheen of mist rolling in from the ocean. The ballroom behind me pulsed with muffled music, a false rhythm that no longer belonged to me. Thomas set his briefcase on the hood of my Buick, its leather worn but strong, like a sentinel of order. He opened it with a careful click, and the sound carried across the quiet lot like a bell. Inside, the folders were stacked neatly, each one a piece of my life I had allowed to be siphoned away in silence. He pulled the first one free and laid it flat, smoothing the page with his palm. "Notice of cancellation," he said, his voice steady. "The lease guarantee for Clara and Evan's apartment. Without your signature, they cannot stay there." I looked at the paper. My name is printed bold at the bottom. For years, that name had been the safety net beneath them, invisible but unbreakable. I uncapped the pen Thomas handed me. My hand trembled, but I pressed it steady. Slowly, deliberately, I signed, Sylvia Carter. The pen's nib scratched against the page, and the sound filled my chest like the release of a long-held breath. Thomas slipped the paper into a fresh envelope, then brought out the second folder, Termination of Automatic Transfers. "These are the monthly deposits you've been making. Rent, credit cards, discretionary payments. All will stop tonight." I scanned the columns of numbers. $4,000 here, $800 there. Years of quiet rescues laid bare in tidy rows. They looked so clinical on paper, stripped of the nights I had sat awake, convincing myself I was saving my daughter. I pressed the pen down again. Each stroke was slower this time, deliberate, as though I were sewing shut a wound that had bled too long. When the ink settled, my name stood firm. I whispered to myself, "No more proving love with money." Thomas's eyes softened, though his tone remained professional. "Kindness without boundaries feeds greed. Boundaries make kindness endure." He set aside the signed page, then lifted the heaviest folder of all. The ballroom's glow flickered in his glasses as he spoke. "Revocation of event guarantee. This very evening, Sylvia. Without your signature, the cost of this wedding falls to them. $53,000. The venue, the band, the flowers, it will all be theirs to pay." I froze, my hand tightening around the pen. The music from inside carried faintly, a violin climbing a note, forced laughter from a table of guests. For a heartbeat, guilt pricked me. I pictured Clara's smile as a child, frosting on her chin from a birthday cake Harold had baked. But then another image seared itself over that memory. Her hand tearing the necklace from my throat, pearls scattering across the marble while strangers gasped. I lowered the pen, touching it to the page. Slowly, carefully, I signed. Each curve of each letter felt final, like hammer strikes on iron. When the last letter curled closed, I set the pen down. My chest felt lighter, though tears pressed at the corners of my eyes. Thomas gathered the documents, slipping them into their envelopes with the precision of a surgeon. He closed the briefcase with a clean click and rested his hand on its lid. "Paperwork is silent justice," he said quietly. "It does not shout. It does not humiliate. It simply holds." I nodded, my voice catching but steady. "Then let it hold me now." The broken necklace lay in my lap, the pearl scarred from its fall but still glowing faintly in the dome light. I curled it into my palm, closing my fingers tight around it. The ballroom doors opened again, a rush of light and laughter spilling into the night before they swung shut. Inside, Clara was still celebrating, still basking in the performance of triumph. She had no idea that the floor beneath her had already shifted. I breathed deeply, the salt air sharp against my lungs. For years, I had believed survival meant silence. Tonight, I understood silence could also mean resolve. Thomas placed the envelopes back in his case, then looked at me not as a client, but as a woman who had drawn a line. "By morning," he said, "they will feel the weight of these signatures." I looked down at my name inked across 3 pages, bold and unshaken. "So will I," I whispered. "For the first time, I feel it belongs to me again." The ballroom looked different when I stepped back inside, not because the chandeliers had dimmed, but because I had changed. My shoulders felt taller, my eyes steadier. Thomas walked at my side, his briefcase in hand, and Marjorie followed a step behind like a quiet sentinel. Guests turned toward us, murmurs rising like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. Clara spotted me first. Her smile froze, then twisted. "You came back," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the hush. "Haven't you embarrassed me enough?" I didn't answer. Thomas moved forward, his voice carrying calmly but firmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. I am Thomas Hale, legal counsel for Mrs. Sylvia Carter. Effective immediately, all financial guarantees tied to Clara and Evan Grant are rescinded." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the click of phones recording. Clara's laugh cracked brittle in the air. "This is ridiculous." "She can't do this. She's my mother." Thomas opened the briefcase, withdrawing the signed papers one by one. Lease, guarantee, revoked. Automatic transfers terminated. Wedding guarantee canceled. From this moment forward, the debts belong to Mr. and Mrs. Grant alone. Evan paled, tugging at his collar. Clara lunged toward the documents, but Thomas held them out of reach. "You can't!" she shrieked. "You can't do this to me!" Finally, I stepped forward. My voice was quiet but clear, steady as the tide. "I am your mother, Clara. Not your wallet, not your deed, not your bank." The words struck harder than any shout. The ballroom hushed so deeply I could hear the faint hum of the lights above. Clara blinked, stunned, as though she had never seen me before. Gasps spread when Thomas read aloud the numbers, the tens of thousands in transfers, the $53,000 owed for the reception itself. Phones captured every word. What had been Clara's triumph turned into a public unraveling. Her knees buckled, and Evan grabbed her arm, his face drained of color. Guests whispered, some with pity, others with a trace of grim satisfaction. The band stopped mid-note. The manager of the venue slipped to the edge of the room, already calculating how to demand payment. Clara's mascara streaked as she collapsed into a chair. "You've ruined me," she sobbed. "You've ruined everything." I stood still, pearls from the broken necklace burning cold in my palm. "No, Clara. You ruined it yourself when you tore this from me. What you thought was jewelry was dignity, and tonight you stripped it away in front of 150 witnesses." Her cries filled the silence, but no one moved to comfort her. Evan's parents sat stiffly, their faces pale, their plans crumbling. Evan muttered something about lawsuits, but even his voice lacked conviction. I turned away, my heels steady against the marble. "That is enough," I said to Thomas. He gathered the papers, closed his briefcase, and followed. Marjorie placed a hand gently at my back. Outside, the night air washed over me like cool water. I breathed deeply, no longer heavy with shame, but lighter with resolve. The days that followed confirmed what I already knew. The apartment lease was terminated. Their belongings spilled onto the sidewalk in cardboard boxes, cameras catching every angle of Clara in her once pristine wedding dress now wrinkled and stained. The unpaid invoices stacked high. Flowers, band, ballroom, all redirected to them. Calls I did not answer flooded my phone. First angry, then pleading, then threatening. I let the silence be my answer. When the weight of it pressed too heavy, I held the broken necklace. The clasp bent, one pearl scratched from its fall. For years I had seen it as a symbol of promises kept. Now, broken, it became something else. Survival scarred but not erased. One afternoon, I carried it to a small jeweler tucked between a bakery and a laundromat. The man behind the counter, his hair silver, studied it gently. "This can be repaired," he said, "but the mend will leave a line here. A scar of sorts." I nodded. "That's fine. I don't need it to be perfect. Just whole again." When I returned 2 days later, the necklace rested in a velvet box. The pearls gleamed as they always had, but the clasp bore a thin solder mark, delicate yet visible if you looked closely. I ran my thumb across it, feeling the seam. It did not diminish the necklace. It deepened it. That evening, I wore it again, Standing by the balcony, watering the geraniums Harold had once loved, the cool pearl lay against my throat like a promise, not of perfection, but of strength restored. I whispered into the dusk, my voice low but steady. Paperwork may be silent, but so is dignity. And both hold the ocean wind carried the words away, but inside me they stayed, carved like truth. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and recycled air. I sat at the respondent's table, my hands folded neatly on the smooth surface, the repaired necklace cool against my skin. The scar in the clasp felt like a pulse, steadying me. Across the aisle, Clara sat beside Evan, both in muted gray as though they were dressing for virtue. Their lawyer, a man with slicked hair and a practiced smile, shuffled papers theatrically, as though truth lived only in his folders. When the judge entered, the room rose. I did too, spine straight, eyes steady. Clara avoided my gaze, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she didn't need. For a flicker, I saw the little girl who once fell asleep on the hotel's velvet sofa. Then the image vanished, replaced by the woman who had torn the necklace from my throat. Their lawyer began, his tone oily with rehearsed sympathy. "Your Honor, this case is about an elderly widow who has lost her ability to make rational decisions. My clients, Clara and Evan Grant, seek only to ensure her safety. They have observed erratic behavior, emotional outbursts, impulsive financial decisions. They are not motivated by greed, but by love and concern for her well-being." He gestured toward me like I was an exhibit. "This is not about money." "It is about protection," murmurs rippled through the gallery. I sat very still, my palms pressed flat, refusing to tremble. Then Thomas rose. He buttoned his jacket with the calm of a man who knew exactly what he carried. His voice was steady, unhurried. "Your Honor, we respect the seriousness of this petition. But the evidence speaks otherwise. My client, Mrs. Sylvia Carter, is 74 years old, yes, widowed, yes, but she is deliberate, disciplined, and entirely competent." He clicked a remote. The monitor lit up with the video from the ballroom. The sound filled the courtroom. The snap of my necklace breaking, the gasps of 150 witnesses, Clara's voice demanding the deed. The judge leaned forward, brows tightening. "This," Thomas said evenly, "is the so-called irrational outburst. A mother refuses to surrender her life's work at her daughter's wedding. And what was the daughter's response? Public assault, humiliation. Does that strike this court as the action of a caregiver concerned for her mother's safety?" Clara flushed crimson, clutching the tissue tighter. Evan shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Thomas placed documents on the evidence table. Receipts, transfers, my spiral notebook with dates written in my own hand. For 3 years, Mrs. Carter subsidized her daughter's life. Over $200,000 in quiet support. Rent, credit cards, tuition, even wedding deposits. Every payment is documented, every act is consistent. This is not the behavior of a woman incapable. It is the behavior of a mother drained by entitlement. The lawyer sputtered. "Objection, irrelevant." "Overruled," the judge said firmly. "Continue, Mr. Hale." Thomas lifted the notebook. Its cover was worn, the ink inside steady. "This notebook records every visit, every conversation. When Clara left brochures on her pillow, when Evan measured the lobby behind her back. These are not the entries of a confused mind. They are the deliberate observations of a woman who saw manipulation unfolding and chose to preserve evidence." He lowered his voice, letting the silence settle. "This is not frailty. This is foresight." Then he laid down the final piece, an email subpoenaed from Evan's father's server. The subject line, Family Enforcement Fund. The courtroom screens glowed as Thomas read aloud. "If Sylvia resists, we must establish a fund to cover legal costs for compelling her transfer." Judges respond well to safety arguments. Gasps spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. The judge's gaze sharpened. He turned to Clara. "Do you deny sending or receiving this?" Clara stammered. I didn't mean—" "Yes or no?" the judge pressed. Her voice cracked. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The gallery shifted, whispers rising, then fading into stillness. I sat without moving, my necklace cool against my throat, my breath steady. Finally, the judge spoke. His gavel tapped once, firm. "This petition is denied. There is no evidence of incompetence. On the contrary, there is troubling evidence of attempted financial exploitation. I am referring this file to the district attorney for further investigation into potential elder abuse." The lawyer's face was drained of color. Evan dropped his gaze to the table, his jaw clenched. Clara covered her face with both hands, her tissue soaked. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply folded my hands again, my silence heavier than their pleas. For years, they mistook that silence for weakness. Today, silence had become victory. As the courtroom emptied, I rose slowly, touching the necklace at my throat. The scar and the clasp pressed against my skin like the truth itself. Outside, Thomas placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said. I shook my head softly. "No, it has only begun. They must now live with the cost of what they tried to take." The sun spilled across the courthouse steps, warm against my face. Around me, people whispered, some in pity, others in admiration. I kept walking, each step steady, each breath my own. The silence followed me, not as a burden, but as my shield. Back at the hotel, after the courthouse dust had settled, the lobby felt different. The lamps glowed the same way they always had. The brass bell still sat polished on the counter, but the air carried a lighter weight. I moved slowly through the space Harold and I had once built, my fingers brushing the banister he varnished with his own hands. For the first time in months, I could breathe without waiting for the next demand. That night, I sat at my old desk, the scarred wood marked with decades of ledgers and receipts. I pulled out a piece of cream stationery, the kind we once used for guest notes, and began to write. The letter was to Clara. I didn't plan to mail it, but I needed the words out of my chest. I wrote, "My daughter, today the court saw what I have carried for years. You wanted to paint me frail. You wanted to reduce my love to a deed, a signature. But I remember who you were before ambition hardened you. I remember the girl who rang the hotel bell until the whole lobby laughed with you. I loved you then. I love you still, though differently now. Love does not mean surrender. Love does not erase dignity. If you ever return, it must be without demands. It must be with respect." When I finished, my hand trembled. I folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it beneath Harold's photograph. A letter not for the mail, but for memory. Marjorie came by with her usual practical grace. She placed a basket of lemons from her garden on the counter and said, "You are not done yet, Sylvia. You are free now, but freedom is seed." Plant it, her words settled deep. Later that week, Thomas joined us at the kitchen table in the small apartment behind the lobby. Papers spread before us, not contracts of survival this time, but documents of creation. That evening, the Sylvia Carter Foundation was born, a fund to protect older women from being coerced into selling their homes or assets. We began small. Thomas offered his expertise pro bono. Marjorie brought her nurse's insight, knowing the soft angles of manipulation families used. Safety, health, convenience. I contributed my story, painful though it was. Together we sketched a mission. No woman should ever stand alone the way I once did. Word spread quietly. Within weeks, the first letters arrived. A widow pressured by her son to sign over a duplex. A grandmother whose daughter-in-law had forged checks. Women trembling the way I once trembled, unsure if anyone would believe them. We answered every letter, every call with patience and clarity. One afternoon, as I was arranging fresh flowers in the lobby, a familiar figure appeared. Mr. Harris, a guest who had returned to the hotel every summer for 30 years, stood with a single rose in his hand. His blazer was neat, his shoes polished, but his eyes carried sorrow. He placed the rose on the counter. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "I watched the news. I read the whispers in town. You did what I never dared. My son drained me dry with loans and promises. I never found the courage to say no. He is gone now, and so is most of what I had. But you said no, in front of everyone. You said no." His throat caught, but he held steady. "You said it for all of us who never did." I touched the rose, its petals deep red, almost bruised. My voice came quiet. "We all carry stories, Mr. Harris. Sometimes the bravest thing is not saying yes, but surviving after the no." His eyes watered, but he smiled a small, grateful smile. "You reminded me that dignity can outlive regret." Then he pressed my hand once and left, the rose still between us. I placed it in the vase with the others, but it stood out, a beacon of deep red among whites and yellows. That evening, as Marjorie and I drank tea, I caught myself staring at it. It was not just a flower, it was proof. Proof I was not alone. Proof that my no had echoed farther than the courtroom walls. The foundation grew from that echo. We found office space in town, small but sturdy, with donated furniture and a volunteer receptionist who believed in the cause. Thomas drafted bylaws. Marjorie set up a helpline. I gave speeches, my voice shaking at first, then firming with each retelling. Women came, some alone, some escorted by nieces or neighbors. They carried folders of unpaid bills, photocopied deeds, letters from manipulative relatives. We listened, we guided, we defended. Paperwork became our shield, signatures of our quiet swords. At night, I often sat in the hotel lobby with my repaired necklace around my neck, the scar on the clasp catching the lamplight. It was no longer just Harold's wedding gift. It had become the emblem of what we stood for. Strength restored, not erased. Scars turned into anchors. Looking at that rose in the vase, at the necklace on my throat, at the letters stacked neatly on the desk of our foundation office, I felt a shift. For so long I thought I was fighting alone, one woman against her own blood. But now I know the truth. I was never alone. There were others, too many others. Together we were louder than silence, stronger than shame. And in that realization, I found peace. The autumn air smelled of salt and lemon polish the evening Clara returned. I had just finished setting fresh roses in the lobby vase, the same ritual Harold once teased me about. Outside the glass doors, I saw her figure across the street, framed by the fading dusk. She was not the radiant bride who once demanded my deed, nor the furious woman shrieking in a ballroom. She looked smaller now, her arms folded tightly against the chill, her shoulders hunched, her face older than her years. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The hotel lamps glowed behind me, warm against the gathering dark. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her hesitation almost painful to watch. My heart ached, remembering the girl who once colored with crayons behind the front desk and fell asleep under Harold's jacket while guests checked in. That child had lived here once. That child had laughed freely. Slowly, I stepped to the door and placed my hand on the brass handle. I pulled it open just halfway. The night breeze slipped in, cool against my skin. Clara startled at the sound, taking a hesitant step forward. Our eyes met through the space of that half-open door. I said nothing. I neither invited her in nor pushed her away. I let the silence hold the weight. Inside my chest, my thoughts formed words I did not speak aloud. This door will not open for greed. It will not swing wide for manipulation. It will only open with respect. Clara's eyes flickered, shame darting across her face like a shadow. She looked down at her shoes, then back at me, lips parting as though to speak. No words came. She stood there, rooted on the pavement, and I held my ground inside the threshold. The moment stretched long, but I felt no need to fill it. My silence was enough. At last, she shifted back, her gaze dropping. She did not cross. She did not knock. She remained outside. And I let the door ease shut, not slammed, not locked, simply closed. A door half open carries its own meaning. An invitation one must earn, not presume. Later that night, I walked through the lobby, listening to its rhythm. The brass clock ticking steadily, the soft thud of luggage wheels as guests returned from dinner, the murmur of voices drifting from the lounge. The hotel was alive again, not a battleground, not a vault under siege, but a home. I was 76 now, yet I felt lighter than I had in decades. The weight of silence had turned into strength. I paused at the mirror near the front desk. The pearl necklace rested at my throat, its clasp repaired with a faint scar visible if you looked closely. I touched it gently, my thumb grazing the seam. That scar was no longer a wound. It was proof that what breaks can be mended, not erased, but carried with honesty. The pearl gleamed softly under the lamplight, steady and quiet. I heard Harold's voice then, as clearly as if he stood beside me. "Real money is quiet," he had said long ago. Tonight the words returned with new meaning. Real money is quiet, and real love is too. The lobby filled with that truth, unspoken but steady. The hotel was thriving again. Bookings steady, travelers finding shelter under our roof. Marjorie hummed in the small apartment kitchen, and Thomas stopped by with updates from the foundation. Guests lingered longer at the counter, recognizing me not only as a widow, but as a woman who had drawn her line and kept it. I looked toward the doors once more. They stood closed, strong oak with brass handles that gleamed no matter how many storms passed. Beyond them, the night stretched wide, full of possibilities. Clara might return one day, empty-handed, carrying nothing but humility. If she did, she would find me here. But until then, the threshold was mine to guard. I brewed mint tea, the way Harold once liked it, leaves crushed gently between my fingers, the kettle steaming like a prayer. Carrying the cup to the balcony, I listened to the ocean's winter blue waves. The necklace lay cool against my skin, the scar shining faint but firm. Peace filled me, not because all wounds were healed, but because I had chosen how to live with them. I had learned at last that silence is not emptiness. Silence can be dignity. Silence can be love. And as I stood there, the pearl glimmering softly, I whispered into the night, "Real money is quiet, and real love is too." Now let me ask you, listening to my story, do you think I was right? Leave a comment below. Share where you are watching from, and let us build a circle of voices that believe dignity still matters.